Hello, welcome to the video. Today we are going to discuss all things strategies, and we're going to figure out how we can start building better studio strategies so we can move beyond do more, do better to a targeted and effective action. By the end of this video, we will learn what a strategy is and what it isn't, and we'll understand the 5-part framework. We'll practice fixing a weak strategy, and then we'll get ourselves a game plan so we can start to elevate our studios. Okay, let's level set first. So, what is a strategy versus what is not a strategy? Let's start with what it is. It's a plan that's based on specific goals, and it's built with the design to overcome existing barriers and challenges. It's focused on behavior and enablement. This is versus what a strategy is not. What's not a strategy is when we have a plan centered around doing a task more. This looks more like a to-do list, and it often is just a one-time fix to get us through, where a strategy is designed to be a holistic movement forward in the studio as a whole. Okay, we know what a strategy is, so let's just take a glance at a weak strategy so we can level set moving forward. Let's look at our goal. So, our goal is to increase book rate, and how we're going to do that is increase the volume of lead calls per employee. And as leaders, we'll review the call volume weekly. Great. So, what makes this weak? Well, for our goal, we could always add a little something objective, maybe increase book rates by 2%. It's always fun to see that number go up. And the strategy. So, our strategy is really towing the line between a to do list item and a behavior. And really, what moves this into the category of strategy is the fact that it's not really a one time fix. If we increase the volume of lead calls, that likely will impact our book rate. The more people we talk to, the more opportunities we have to book. But how can we make this better? Well, we can make it better by adding a second bullet item. Not only are we increasing the volume, but we can also work to increase the quality. Your strategies can have more than one item in the section of how we're going to make this happen. Okay, so how do we build a great strategy? Well, we have a 5-part framework that we can use to really walk through our goals and our barriers so that we can come up with a great action plan. We'll go over each of these pieces individually, but let's take a look at them as a whole just for a moment. So we always want to start with our goal. What do we want to achieve? Then we really need to figure out our barriers and solutions. We have to understand what's getting in the way before we can understand what action is going to help us leap over that barrier. And then we want to consider our actions. What are we going to do to enable success? And our employees' actions. What is the team going to do differently? And finally, we'll need to assess, how are we going to measure progress? How are we going to make sure that our strategy is working to achieve our goal? Okay, step 1 is the goal. This is our starting point. So, how can we create a great goal? Well, 3 things to consider. 1, make it specific. 2, make it measurable. 3, if you can, tie it to a KPI. So here's a good example. We can increase book rate from 43% to 50%. That's great. It's specific in the book rate. It's measurable, 43 to 50%. And we know that book rate is one of our KPIs. So here's an example of a weak goal. Get better at calling leads. So it's not very specific. We know that we're calling leads, but the get better isn't very specific. We can't measure it because it's so vague. And then it's not tied to a KPI like book rate is tied to that KPI. All right, now we're on to barriers. This is the most important part of developing your plan. If we can't properly acknowledge and figure out our barriers, then we can't really develop actions that are designed to jump over those hurdles. So spend time in this planning part of the process. Let's take a look at the 6 common types of barriers and just look at an example for each. Our first is a people barrier. Maybe the MA can't find time to make calls. We also might have a skill barrier. The team doesn't know how to overcome objections. Next, time or capacity. There's no time blocked for lead calls. So this is different than the people one. In the people problem, the MA can't find time. They may have a problem with time management, but in time or capacity, the studio in itself is so booked that there's legitimately no time, there's no downtime to make lead calls. We could have a technology problem. We can't easily find milestones during check in, something like that. Communication problem, there's no daily reminder of expectations, or maybe there's a process problem. There's no clear path from calling a lead for the first time to follow up calls. So, because there's no process, people are just sort of doing whatever they want. So, definitely spend time when you're developing your plans in thinking through your barriers. Our strategy is only going to be able to overcome the barriers that we identify. All right, let's dive a little bit deeper into breaking down these barriers because ultimately our strategy will be designed to overcome these barriers that we identify. So, spending the time now to really understand what's happening in your studio is going to mean a successful strategy at the end of the day. And the best place to start is by asking questions. So if we consider this scenario, that our book rate is 43%, not where we want it to be. Now, I'm going to give you the answer at the beginning here. After your discovery phase, you may find that your team is not contacting enough leads or they're waiting too long to reach out to the lead. But at the beginning of our discovery phase, we don't know, or we may not know, what all of the barriers are. So, how do we get to the point where we have this answer that it turns out we're not contacting enough leads or we're not waiting too long? The easiest way is to start by asking questions. For example, are my people doing the work? In that discovery phase, we may learn that it turns out they're not. They're not contacting enough leads. You may ask, do we have time to do the work? Do we clearly communicate expectations? Do my people know how many leads that they have to reach out to? Do we know the process for the work? And then, are my people doing the work well? It's by asking these 4 really basic questions that you can start to discover what the ultimate barriers are. And then we can develop tactics to overcome those barriers. And once we understand barriers, then we can really find solutions that are going to help us overcome that specific barrier. So consider if this is the issue, what support or solution is needed to overcome it. So if we have discovered that our MAs are not doing the job well, and in this case, maybe they're not asking enough questions to really understand the objection to someone even coming into the studio for a first visit. Well, we have a much better idea of that solution. We can train the team to ask better questions, we can role play, we can observe and coach them. And ultimately, this is what makes a great strategy because now your solution becomes the new behavior, and asking better questions is now the norm. And that's really what makes a fantastic strategy. All right, so we've discovered our barriers. We've found specific solutions that will help us jump over those barriers. Now we get to start building out actions for our employees and ourselves. But let's take a look at our employees. We want to consider what specific team behaviors need to change. consider what do we need to start, or what do we need to stop, or what needs to improve. And as we're building out actions, just like our goals, where we want to add something objective and specific, we want to do the same thing with our employees' actions. So, going more in depth during calls is a little bit vague. I don't know exactly what it looks like to go in depth. I don't know how to be successful with that action. But if you tell me to ask at least 2 probing questions during every lead call, I have a much better idea of what success looks like. Okay, and your behavior. What will you do to support and monitor these changes? Keep in mind that your actions should be visible, trackable, and consistent. So, training and role playing with my team to ask probing questions and then monitoring and coaching is great. It's visible. You can track who was trained, you can track the goal setting, you can track the coaching, and it's consistent. This is as opposed to monitoring lead calls. Yes, that is important. That is something that you're doing, but really, it's not as specific as we want it to be. All right, the last thing we need to do, and the most ongoing thing that we need to do, is consider our assessment. Is our strategy working? How will we know if we're making progress? That's what we need to determine when we build out our assessment. And how often are we going to check on progress? Now, be aware that one way we can check on progress is to continually keep an eye on that goal. If we've done a great job with that goal, then we know that we want to improve something by 3%. That's fantastic. But I would encourage you to look back to the behaviors that you're asking your team to shift. That's really where we want to monitor progress. So, are you reviewing 3 calls a day to check for those probing questions? And then are we reviewing the book rate every Friday? Because ultimately, it's those behaviors that are the first step, and the goal of the book rate is the second step. And if we miss that first step, then we really don't have good eyes on whether this strategy is working or not. Okay, let's pull it together and look at an example. So we'll start from the top and go to the bottom. Our goal is to increase book rate from 43% to 50%. Great, it's specific. Now we have barriers, and notice that we found a few barriers. We found a skill barrier when it comes to poor questioning, so our solution is going to be to offer training. We found a time barrier. There's no call blocks, so there's no time to actually make these calls. So we're going to create blocked times to make these lead calls. And then we have some people issues where there's confidence issues. And our solution can be role playing and coaching in that instance as well. Then we move into our actions. So our leaders' actions provide training and job aid, real-time coaching, role playing, and then of course checking 3 times a week to make sure that we're handling all of this as we should be, verifying call volume daily. Employee actions, they're going to ask more probing questions, they're going to connect OTF as a solution, then they're going to use those time blocks to make the required calls. And lastly, our assessment, we're going to keep monitoring that book rate once a week. And then we are also not going to forget that our team's behavior is to ask more probing questions and make connections. So we're also going to be assessing that as well. Okay, here's another example. It looks a little bit different, but I want you to consider that if someone handed you this strategy, how would you work with them to make it a little bit better? I'll offer you 3 kind of key pieces here. Make sure that we're specifying the goal, make sure that we're identifying barriers and solutions, and that we're clarifying behavior for the leaders and the teams. Remember, behavior over task. So if we look, this person's goal is to increase member retention. They haven't identified barriers and solutions. And the leader's actions are going to be to remind the MA to make utilization calls, The team, they're just going to make the calls, and the assessment is to make sure that the calls are made. So take a moment on this slide and figure out, how would you specify the goal? What are two potential barriers or solutions? And clarify at least one leader behavior and team behavior that is something other than checking the box of utilization calls. So, what now? Well, start working on your strategy and develop your action plan. Use the template, use the probing questions, use this video as a walkthrough as you build out your own strategy, and make sure that your strategy isn't too huge, right? We want our strategies to be specific in a way that they're attainable. So if we have 4 goals in our strategy, that's going to be huge and massive and maybe a little bit unachievable. So make sure that you're handling things in small chunks. Okay, let's wrap up. So remember that a strategy involves a specific plan and it's designed to overcome barriers. Use that 5-part framework to develop your strategy. It's going to help you with your thought process. Make sure the tactics and behaviors that you set out for yourself and your team are clear and specific. And always, always work with your regional team to support your strategy. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.